Messick's, a helping hand with your land.
Neil from Messick's here today to give you a top 10 tips and tricks with a set of pallet forks. We do a lot of loading here at Messick's, whether it's customers' trailers coming in and out, moving machinery around the yard. We have 4 different machines out here that are set up here to the side of the business for anybody to jump on and take care of the different varying needs that happen out here in the yard. So we have done a lot of customization and modification to our own pallet forks to make that kind of work easier. So we're going to walk around here today and show you some of the things that we do to these forks to make them more versatile. If you don't already own a set of pallet forks and you start looking at the variety of what's out there on the market, you may be shocked by the amount of options that you might have in the set of forks that you might choose. Basically, every implement manufacturer is going to offer pallet forks within their product line. There are a wild variety of different fork options for your machine, and if you're going to be making any kind of regular, frequent, meaningful use of forks, there's a couple of things you absolutely want to avoid. Those would be clamp-on forks, forks where the fork itself is some kind of box welded assembly and not a cast one, or any kind of fork that's not on an adjustable frame where the fork itself somehow pins into a backing plate. There's all kinds of really inexpensive things like that will come over from overseas. They're not of the quality that it takes to do the modifications and stuff that we're going to talk about here today. So if you're going through and doing a lot of these things, making sure that you're starting from a good, reliable, solid foundation is pretty important. You'll notice in the tips of our forks, we generally will put holes in the end of them. This is done for a whole bunch of reasons. If you drill them large enough, you can actually drop a ball down through it and bolt a ball onto the end of your fork in order to move trailers and that sort of thing. We usually would leave them open so that we can drop a pin down through there to move around any of the implements or round balers and that kind of stuff out here on the lot that are going to have hitches in them. Putting these holes in can be a real challenge. It is possible to drill through these forks with the right drill, but a lot of times you'll see guys use a torch in order to burn these out. You do want to make sure if you're doing this, you're only doing it in the very tip, that you're not getting back into the structure of the fork where you can, start to compromise the lifting capacity of the fork itself. But by and large, you'll find guys saying that doing them out here in the tips is generally okay. Now, not to say that can't break out eventually. See over here on ours, that did happen on our one fork over here. So just be cautious about where you put those things, but generally that hole can add a lot of functionality to the fork. And we haven't done too much of this here, but I've heard of guys taking the end of their pallet forks and laying a little bit of crosshatch of weld spatter on the end of the fork itself. And that's so when you're using those fork tips to get up underneath of something and move it, it gives a little bit of resistance there at the end of the fork to things sliding off the end. So just by very simply taking your welder and trying to get a little bit of that weld sticking to the end of the fork, you can make it all that much easier to move stuff around. When it comes to adjusting pallet forks, more force can be required than what sometimes you want to get those forks to slide back and forth on the frame, but it can be much easier if they're properly maintained. If you go back and you use that grease gun and you pump some grease in the back side of the forks there, keeping those things lubricated so that the fork can slide back and forth makes it a lot easier to keep those things adjusted. There's also a cool thing on Artilian forks where they're using a powdered graphite surface on the back of those forks to give you a long-lasting lubricated surface on that high-end option for forks. So you can save yourselves a lot of grief just by keeping these things lubricated so that you're easy to move the fork back and forth. Our next tip is to know the capacity of your forks. When you buy a set of pallet forks, they're going to come along with a load rating, generally say 2,500 to 5,500, 6,000 pounds or so. When you look at that load rating, that is the load that that set of forks as a whole can handle with, say, a skid sitting across the forks themselves. If you go through and you're going to lift something with just one fork, you need to have in mind that you need to have the capacity of that fork frame. So if this is a 4,500 pound set of forks, and I'm gonna lift some kind of load that's off center, is sitting on top of one fork, 2,250 pounds is actually my capacity. When you look at the machine that you're pinning these forks on, oftentimes the single fork capacity is well below what the machine itself can manage. So this big New Holland L230 skid steer could very easily bend this premium set of forks by having that full load sit just on one fork itself. So generally when I size pallet forks, I usually like to go through and size them so that the machine itself can't greatly exceed that single fork capacity. The back portion of a set of pallet forks is called a brick guard. This is here in order to keep you from spilling something back on yourself. You'll notice that some of the least expensive pallet forks out there lack this piece in their entirety. When we choose forks to use around our lots, we generally will choose something that has this back here. It's to protect the operator if you start to spill something off the back. With the rollback that you can have on these forks, when you roll your loader bucket or your forks back, any kind of load that's on there can shift back towards the machine. So having this piece on the back of the pallet fork is really important for safety. So watch those cheap forks. They often are going to have this not back here at all, or a very simple structure that doesn't protect from small things coming back through. Take a look at ours here. I mean, obviously this brick guard has been put to good use and has protected the operator many times over by now. When you're putting forks onto a skid steer, they can get in the way of getting in and out of the machine. You can get walk-through pallet forks that are going to have an opening here in the middle of the brick guard that will allow you to step through. You can also have forks, more premium forks generally, that are going to have steps over here on the sides, so that if you're entering from an angle, it gives you a place here to put your foot where you don't have a whole lot of options back in here around the cylinders. Adding these onto your pallet forks could be an easy thing. If you're able to weld this little loop out here on the side, would be an easy addition. Once you have a piece of equipment, you generally are going to run into all kinds of silly loads and things that you're going to want to move with your machine. Moving those things with a dirt bucket can be a real challenge, right? If you're going to say pick up something with a chain, draping the chain around the dirt bucket is a pretty tough thing to do. It's not a good place in order to get it there that it's not going to say tweak the tractor sideways or pull in weird ways. Pallet forks give you a lot better options for that. Now, generally, I don't love seeing guys throw chains off of the forks themselves. They can slide back and forth. But these D-rings back here on the back of a more premium set of forks give you better places in order to attach chains and stuff too. Some forks now are going to come through a trailer hitch receivers too. Artillion's doing that now, where you could slide that hitch receiver back in and pin it into place to be able to move around trailers or anything that's going to have a ball hitch on the front. You can add additional functionality to your pallet forks by sliding a sleeve over top of the fork itself and locking it in place. You can see one of these sleeve systems that we build here ourselves for use on our lots. It's a simple piece of box steel that we lock back onto the fork, either with a chain or with some set bolts that you would go and crank down against the fork. On top of that, then we add storage for different kinds of receivers, D-ring locations for us to do lifting when we're loading trailers. So you can extend the functionality of that fork with this very simple weldment. Another thing you should consider doing for your pallet forks is adjusting your loader's level indicator. These indicators right here usually are going to come through set up for your bucket to give you an idea where that bucket's lower cutting edge is so that you can cut straight into something. It can be a really good tool for your pallet forks as well. It's usually really challenging to see the forks and make sure they're flat when you're going into something like a skid. Adjusting this level indicator's position so that this is showing you where the fork level is at can make them a lot easier to use. So those are 10 tips and tricks for your pallet forks. I think by running through this today, it's also demonstrated the value of a more premium set of forks. You know, we sell forks at all different price points, but you'd be surprised by the added functionality and quality that comes by spending just a little bit more money for a better set of forks. So if you're shopping for any attachments, you have parts or service needs for a machine you've already got, give us a call at Messick's. We're available at 800-222-3373 or online at Messick's.com. Or just simply maintaining, that's getting wordy. Okay, forget it. Take 8. There are forks, we have a walkthrough. All right. And there's gonna be wild differences in quality of them and the configuration of them.